So we have the actual Hebrew text. Of course, one would ask, which Hebrew? We've already went through that a number of YouTubes ago about how they restructured the language around the 5th and the 9th century into something that's more blocked off with punctuation marks and vowel marks and so on. In any case, Josh McDowell, the Hebrew text, quantity manuscripts. Even though the Old Testament does not boast of the same quantity manuscripts as the New, the number of manuscripts available today is quite remarkable. Several reasons have been suggested for the scarcity of early Hebrew manuscripts. The first and most obvious reason is the combination of antiquity and destructibility. 2,000 to 3,000 years is a long time to expect ancient documents to last. Nonetheless, several lines of evidence support the conclusion that their quality is very good. First, it is important to establish the quantity of the manuscripts available. There are several important collections of Hebrew manuscripts today. The first collection of Hebrew manuscripts made by Benjamin Kennicott listed 615 manuscripts of the Old Testament. Then Giovannit de Rossi, maybe Giovanni, I don't know, published a list of 731 manuscripts. The most important manuscript discoveries in modern times are those of the Cairo Geniza, 1890s, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1947, in which we discovered nothing new, but many manuscripts there. In following years, in the Cairo synagogue attic, a Geniza, a storehouse, or for old manuscripts, was discovered. 200,000 manuscripts and fragments, wow, were found, some 10,000 of which are biblical. Near the end of the 19th century, many fragments from the 6th to 8th centuries were found in an old synagogue in Cairo, Egypt, which had been St. Michael's Church until AD 882. They were found there in the Geniza as well, a storage room where worn or faulty manuscripts were hidden until they could be disposed of properly. This Geniza had apparently been walled off and forgotten until its recent discovery. In this small room, as many as 200,000 fragments were preserved, including biblical texts in Hebrew and Aramaic. The Bible fragments date from the 5th century AD. Of the manuscripts found in the Cairo Geniza, about one half are now housed at Cambridge University. The rest are scattered throughout the world. Cairo Geniza's authority, Paul Cahill, has identified more than 120 rare manuscripts prepared by the Babylonian group of Masoretic scribes, who are especially diligent. The largest collection of Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts in the world is the second Furkowicz collection in Leningrad. It contains 1,582 items of the Bible and Masorah on parchment, 725 on paper, plus 1,200 additional Hebrew manuscript fragments in the Antonin collection. Cayley contends also that these Antonin collection manuscripts and fragments are all from Cairo Geniza. In the Furkowicz collection are found 14 Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts from between the years AD 929 and AD 1121 that originated in the Cairo Geniza. I just had a thought here. It comes from all over the world, so somebody can't say, well, somebody authorized it, or there's a conspiracy, or people wrote this and made the Bible look good. Not so many, and not from all over the world, with too many people involved. Cairo Geniza manuscripts are scattered all over the world. Some of the better ones in the United States are in the Enloe Memorial Collection at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. The British Museum catalog lists 161 Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts. At Oxford University, the Bodleian Library catalog lists 146 Old Testament manuscripts, each containing a large number of fragments. Goshen-Gottstein estimates that in the United States there are tens of thousands of Semitic manuscript fragments, about 5% of which are biblical, more than 500 manuscripts. The most significant Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts date from between the 3rd century BC and the 4th century AD. Of these, the most remarkable manuscripts are those of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. They include one complete Old Testament book, Isaiah, and thousands of manuscripts, which together represent every Old Testament book except Esther. The Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts are highly significant because they confirm The accuracy of other manuscripts dated much later. That's why I said, what did you discover in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Nothing new. For example, Cairo Codex, AD 895, is the earliest Masoretic manuscript prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls discoveries. It is now located in the British Museum, also called Codex Cairnesis, I guess. It was produced by the Masoretic Moses Ben Asher family and contains both the latter and former prophets. The rest of the Old Testament is missing from it. Codex of Prophets of Leningrad, AD 916, contains Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. The earliest complete MS of the Old Testament is the Codex Babylonicus Petropolitanus, located in Leningrad. I'm glad I didn't take Latin. It was prepared for a corrected text of Rabbi Aaron ben Moses ben Asher before AD 1000. Aleppo Codex, around 900. Oops. Go back there. An exceptionally valuable manuscript. It also once was thought lost, but in 1958 was rediscovered. It did not, however, escape damage. It was partially destroyed in the 1947 riots in Israel. Aleppo Codex was the oldest complete Masoretic manuscript of the entire Old Testament. You see that? So there's a riot in Israel. That's why these manuscripts are still around the world that serve to corroborate one another 99%. British Museum Codex, AD 950, contains part of Genesis through Deuteronomy. Reuchlin Codex of the Prophets, 1105 AD. This text was prepared by the Masorete Ben Naphtali. This brings up the question of the faithfulness of the transmission of the Bible text. There are numerous types of manuscript errors, which the textual critic may discover in the early manuscripts of the Old Testament. Are these of so serious a nature as to corrupt the message itself, or make it impossible to convey the true meaning? That's a good question. If they are, then God's purpose has been frustrated. He could not convey his revelation so that those of later generations could understand it correctly. If he did not exercise a restraining influence over the scribes who wrote out the standard and authoritative copies of the scriptures, then they corrupted and falsified the message. If the message was falsified, the whole purpose of bestowing a written revelation has come to nothing. For such a corrupted scripture would be a mixture of truth and error, necessarily subject to human judgment rather than sitting in judgment upon man. Go back to this great source at both books, 1972 and 1999, of Josh McDowell, Evidence and New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Cairo Codex, AD 895, is located in the British Museum. It was produced by the Masoretic Moses Ben Asher family. Contains both latter and former prophets. Codex of the Prophets of Leningrad, 916, contains Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. The earliest complete MS of the Old Testament is the Codex Babylonicus, as I said, Petropolitanus, located in Leningrad. It was prepared from a corrected text of Rabbi Aaron ben Moses and Ben Asher before 1000 AD. It's a little repetitive because I'm using both editions of Josh McDowell's book. Aleppo Codex, 8900, is an exceptionally valuable MS. It once was thought lost, but in 1958 was rediscovered, and it did not escape damage. And British Museum Codex, 950, contains both parts of Genesis through Deuteronomy. Reuchlin Codex of the Prophets, 1105 AD. The preparation of this text was done by the Masorete Ben Naphtali. We have all kinds of corresponding corroboration without any contradictions. The witness of the Dead Sea Scrolls to the reliability of the Hebrew Scriptures. The big question was asked about first by Sir Frederick Kenyon. Does this Hebrew text, which we call Masoretic, and which we have shown to descend from a text drawn up around AD 100, faithfully represent the Hebrew text as originally written by the authors of the Old Testament books? The Dead Sea Scrolls give us the explicit and positive answer. The problem before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was, how accurate are the copies we have today compared to the text of the first century? Because the text has been copied over many times, can we trust it? All right, what's the question? What are the Dead Sea Scrolls? The scrolls are made up of some 40,000 inscribed fragments. From these fragments, more than 500 books have been reconstructed. Many extra-biblical books and fragments were discovered that shed light on the religious community of Qumran. Such writings as the Zodakite documents, a rule of the community, and the manual of discipline help us to understand the purpose of daily Qumran life. In the various caves are some very helpful commentaries on the scriptures. How were the Dead Sea Scrolls found? Ralph Early gives a vivid and concise answer to how the scrolls were found by sharing an account showing God's providential care. The story of this discovery is one of the most fascinating tales of modern times. In February or March of 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy named Muhammad was searching for a lost goat. He tossed a stone into a hole in a cliff on the west side of the Dead Sea, about 8 miles south of Jericho. To his surprise, he heard the sound of shattering pottery. Investigating, he discovered an amazing sight. On the floor of the cave were several large jars containing leather scrolls wrapped in linen cloth. Because the jars were carefully sealed, the scrolls had been preserved in excellent condition for nearly 1,900 years. They were evidently placed there in AD 68. 5 of the scrolls found in the Dead Sea Cave 1, as it is now called, were bought by the Archbishop of the Syrian Orthodox Monastery at Jerusalem. Meanwhile, 3 other scrolls were purchased by Professor Sukenik of the Hebrew University there. When the scrolls were first discovered, no publicity was given to them. In November of 1947, 2 days after Professor Sukenik purchased 3 scrolls and 2 jars from the cave, he wrote in his diary, "It may be that this is one of the greatest finds ever made in Palestine, a find we never so much as hoped for." But these significant words were not published at the time. Fortunately, in February 1948, the archbishops, who could not read Hebrew, phoned the American School of Oriental Research in Jerusalem and told about the scrolls. By good providence, the acting director of the school at the moment was a young scholar named John Trevor, who was also an excellent amateur photographer. With arduous, dedicated labor, he photographed each column of the great Isaiah scroll, which is 24 feet long and 10 inches high. He developed the plates himself and sent the few prints by airmail to Dr. W. F. Albright of Johns Hopkins University, who was widely recognized as the Dean of American Biblical Archaeologists. By return airmail, Albright wrote, "My heartiest congratulations on the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. What an absolutely incredible find." What an absolutely incredible find, and there can be happily not be the slightest doubt in the world about the genuineness of the manuscript. He dates it about 100 BC. Wow. Not 10,000 AD, 100 BC. 1,000 years later, 1100. Trevor quotes more of Albright's opinions. "There is no doubt in my mind that the script is more archaic than the Nash papyrus. I should prefer a date around 100 BC. In his book, Josh McDowell goes on, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars have Hebrew manuscripts dated 1,000 years earlier than the great Masoretic text manuscripts, enabling them to check the fidelity of the Hebrew text. There is a word-for-word identity in more than 95% of the cases, and the 5% variation consists mostly of slips of the pen and spelling. The Isaiah scroll 1QIS-A from Qumran led the Revised Standard Version translators to make only 13 changes from the Masoretic text. 13 changes! 8 of those were known from ancient versions, and few were significant. Of the 166 Hebrew words in Isaiah 53, only 17 Hebrew letters in the Isaiah B scroll differ from the Masoretic text. 10 letters are a matter of spelling, 4 are stylistic changes, and the other 3 compose the word for light added in verse 11, which does not affect the meaning greatly. Furthermore, that word is also found in the same verse in the Septuagint and in the Isaiah A scroll. There you go. You ever have anything more miraculously preserved? The value of the scrolls. The oldest complete Hebrew MSS we possessed were from 900 AD on. How could we be sure of their accurate transmission since the time of Christ in 32 AD? Thanks to archaeology and the Dead Sea Scrolls,